Ben Alvord, everybody! Yes! Keep it going! All right, there you go. I know how tall you are.
Thank you. It was August of 1990. I was in Montana with my grandfather, halfway through an 1,100-mile group bike tour. I was 14 years old. He was 74. We were up at 4 a.m. about to start biking up a mountain pass. We were about to start biking up a road called Going to the Sun. My grandfather was born in 1916. He was a gifted student, so gifted that he got into Harvard when he was only 15 years old. He said later that he regretted having gone to college so young because he felt like he was behind everyone there socially, to which I said, "Whatever, Grandpa, you got into Harvard at 15, that's badass." After Harvard came World War II. My grandfather was there on D-Day. He was an officer on LST-133. It's the first ship of its kind to land on Omaha Beach during the battle. After the ship landed and the troops and vehicles they carried had disembarked, they had to wait there for hours until the tide came back in so they could go back out to sea in safety. He said as he was waiting, he looked up to the stars and he heard someone say, clear as day, "Go home and marry Jean Drake." That's my grandma. They bought a house in southern Maine for $9,000 cash, and they got to work having kids, 6 of them in all. My grandfather worked at a high school. It was about a 20-minute drive from their house, but he didn't drive there. He biked every day through the winter even, through the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. He became known about town as that guy who bikes everywhere, and he was fine with that. By the time I was born, he was 60 years old, but his love of biking hadn't gone away at all. It had intensified. He had gone on bike tours clear across the US, all through Europe, to Scotland and Ireland and France. He just loved it. My family owned a small cabin tucked into the hills of Vermont. I can remember Grandpa arriving at the cabin after the rest of us were already there, him well into his 60s at this point, having just biked there from Maine. When I was 8 years old, I said, "Grandpa, I want to bike with you to Vermont." And he said, "Sure." So I don't remember much of that. It was so long ago, but we went on training runs. We'd go these 20-mile loops from where I lived. We'd always pass by these local ice cream shops and get some ice cream. And then we biked to Vermont. It was 130 miles. It took us 3 days. I can just remember pedaling furiously on my single-speed bike, standing up on the pedals pretty much the whole way, just trying to keep up, and I made it. We made it. 6 years later, my grandfather offered to take my friend Jeff and I along with him on a bike tour through Glacier National Park in Montana. It's 1,100 miles in total, 60-plus miles a day. Even then, I knew how unusual it was for my 74-year-old grandfather to be biking over 1,000 miles. But now I'm almost 40, and that's crazy. Yeah, I had a fall. I'm not even gonna. So yeah, if I'm 74 and someone asks me to bike 1,000 miles, my joints are immediately gonna go on strike, and I am gonna say that I can't cross the picket line. So the bike tour was a grind. You wake up really early, bike 60 miles, set up camp, eat as much pasta as possible, sleep in a tent, and repeat that. A weekend, I would have murdered someone for a pillow. My grandfather told me later that he wasn't actually worried about the length, the distance of the tour. He was just worried about this one day in the middle. That was the day we had to bike up the road called Going to the Sun. He wasn't sure if he could make it. The Going to the Sun road crosses over the Continental Divide at Logan Pass. It's a narrow road with no guardrails. It's a real butt clencher. Once you start up the pass, you have to deal with 13 miles of continuous uphill, and that's at a 6-degree slope, which if people sounded like they were impressed by that. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that's really steep. That's steep. Like, if you're biking up it, you're probably going to say to yourself, God damn it, I am getting old. And I thought that when I was 14. The real kicker is you have to get to the top of the road by 11 a.m. That's when the road closes to bikers. If you're on the road after 11 a.m. and a park ranger sees you, they will drive you back to the bottom. No mercy. So because of that time limit, we broke camp at 4 a.m. and headed to the pass in darkness. I was 14. I went flying off ahead of everyone, shot up the mountain for like a mile. And that's how long it took the mile to just kick my ass. My legs turned into meat-flavored Jell-O, and the rest of the way up, I was walking half the time. Meanwhile, well behind me, my grandfather was well behind me. He's going at a snail's pace, but steadily forward. The tortoise racing the sun. I made it to the top at 9 a.m., collapsed in a puddle in the shade. At 10:45, my grandfather came around that final corner and started struggling up the last slope of the mountain pass, and he made it at 11 a.m. on the nose. Yeah. That trip was 25 years ago now. My grandfather's 99 years old. He still lives with Jean Drake, his wife of 71 years, on the same land that they bought after the war. Up until just a few months ago, he was exercising every day on his Nordic track for an hour a day. But he's had some falls since then. He's slowing down, he's quieter, he's sleeping a lot, he's not eating like he should. I went to visit them a couple weeks ago, and I realized for the first time that this indestructible man is in fact destructible like all of us are. I realized that he's not going to be around too much longer. I know that's a given when you're talking about somebody who's 99 years old, but you haven't met my grandfather. And I know that once he is gone, I know that when I think of him, I will think of him pedaling up that final stretch of the mountain pass, struggling to the top, the tortoise defeating the sun. Thank you.